Hey guys. Coach Michael Merlino here. I think we're live. Anybody's here, say hi. Welcome to the show. Welcome to our first in-flight running official show. I'm your host, Coach Michael Merlino, and I'm a Houston-based fitness trainer and running coach. I've been coaching runners for about 20 years. I've been doing fitness training for about 3 years. Hold on, I got an Amber Alert. And I coach anywhere from middle schoolers to adults, from 13, 12-year-olds all the way up to seniors, from the 2-mile distance, because middle schoolers run a 2-mile distance, all the way up to the marathon distance. I do group training here in Houston with my group In-Flight Running, a group of about, when we're in season, we're about to go into season, we'll see how it happens with coronavirus, but about 150 members usually. And then I do one-on-one coaching, and I also do online coaching now. So I coach a few people around the country, and some people here in Houston that live kind of the outskirts of Houston that can't take advantage of the group coaching. Okay. Did a small stint with a running radio show that was live a few years ago and stopped that. And so I'm anxious to kind of get back in the driver's seat here and do this new show. This will become a podcast at one point. So eventually the audio we'll have on here will become a podcast. You guys can listen in your car or out for a run, okay? Just get ready to have some fun. I'm going to take a different approach to this. I love the sport of running. I love coaching runners. We're going to be covering the sport from many different angles. We got a great guest tonight. I'm going to introduce him in a second. But a lot of professionals, sports docs, dietitians, you name it, we'll bring them on here, hit everything, every different level of running. And then I think what I want to do is, like, we may have a professional runner on here, but I don't even want to focus on that. I want to focus on telling the great stories, success stories of the people that I've coached over the years here in Houston that I've been blessed to coach. Pretty amazing stories. And I love telling stories because there's someone out there that hears that story and says, man, I want to be like that lady, you know? So it's going to give you hope with your running, no matter where you're at, whether you're just starting or you're looking for a new personal best, or maybe taking it up to that next level, from a 5K to a 10K or half marathon to marathon or whatever. Okay. So let's go. And some housekeeping stuff. One thing I want to show you guys real quick, and just make note of this. Let me pull this up real quick. So I'll pull this up later so you guys can see it, but follow us on Facebook. I would love for you guys to subscribe on our YouTube channel. That way, when we go live, we have got new videos up. We're not just going to do this live show. We're going to do some instructional type videos too for running. Okay. Email me. There's the email address, inflightrunning@gmail.com. I'd love to have your feedback after the show's over today, or you can call me. There's my phone number here in Houston. If you've got any questions about anything, reach out. I'd love to help you out with that, okay? Facebook, you guys that are here, Facebook users, there's a little link above. If you click on that link, it gives StreamYard permission to show your picture and your question. So if you want to ask a question later, put a question mark in your question. I'd love to have your first name and like where you're tuning in from. It'd be great, okay? That's it on the intros. Let me bring in our guest. He's in the green room right now, Dr. Jeffrey Ross, and I'll explain how I met this guy. And so let me pull this off the screen share, and we'll bring the doc in. All right, Dr. Ross, we are live on the inaugural In-Flight Running Show. Okay, like we've been talking about doing this for
years.
10 years. I don't know. We're talking about doing a radio show 20 years ago, right?
Right.
So I just went over the housekeeping stuff. So I want to start, and I got you on screen here. So I want to start with that fateful day in circa 1999, when we thought that was going to be the end of the year. You know the Prince song, "You're going to party like it's 1999," right?
Right.
When I was in the downtown Y training clients, I'll never forget. It was Devin Borden, my client, and he was great about helping me tear the weights down. We were on a leg press machine, and 2 big plates. We call them the big plates, the 45s, and a 25 on each side. And I thought he had taken the 25-pound plate off the rack. He hadn't taken it off. I pulled the 45-pound plate. There was a 25 in front of it. He's looking at me like, what the hell are you doing? Which I found out 3 seconds later. I pulled the big plate off. The 25-pound plate came down on its end, bam, right on my big toe. So then, like an idiot, I go to Memorial Park to meet a girlfriend of mine that I was dating at the time, and she was studying to be a physical therapist, and she's like, you probably broke your toe. So here I'm going to go run, and she's like, no, you need to go to get an x-ray. So I ended up at Dr. Kiki's office. No, I think I called Kiki. Kiki referred me to radiology, and then somehow, he referred me to you. So I ended up in your office. So long story short, I think if it's a big toe, what the hell can you do with a big toe? You just have to rest it, right? So I remember going to your office, and you had the x-ray, you popped it up, and I remember like yesterday, you turned around and went, you shook my hand like, that's when we could shake hands, actually. Dr. Jeffrey Ross, you turned like, what the hell did you do? And I said, 25-pound leg, plate off the leg press. Oh, okay. And I was the last client of the day. And this is what I love about this dude. This is why you guys got to pick sports doctors that get the way us runners are wired. So first question out of the guy, and he goes, what are you doing? You trained for a marathon? I was training for my first marathon. And first question was, so you still want to run marathons? I'm like, heck yeah, man. But if you can fix me. So he goes, well, you're in good shape, because back then I actually had biceps. I was pretty muscled up. we all did, really. So and he said, well, you look like you're going to be a fast healer, so we're not going to cut into tissue, because we do that, you may never be the same guy, because I know you're very non-invasive with things like that, and we'll probably get into that during our discussion. Right. And then you said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to shoot up your toe so you can't feel any pain. I'm going to anesthetize your toe, and I'm going to smush it together. We can get that, because it was a clean break. I'm going to push it together so that bone meets, and we're going to have to wobble back and forth to the x-ray machine, take an x-ray until I've got it right, and then we'll just wrap you up and see what we're going to do with this thing. And so you did that, like hop over to the x-ray machine. I think we did 5 times. You kept putting x-rays up. I had a whole wall of x-rays. And then you're like, we got it. We're not going to get better than this. And then you announced to me that, by the way, you can't drive or do anything for 6 weeks. You're going to be in a hard cast up to your knee. Are you good with that? I'm like, do whatever you need to do, man. So that's kind of how I met you. And ironically, that was my first marathon I was training for. Yeah. I failed 2 more times after. I had failed 1 more time prior to that, and then that one, and then another time. So my first 3 marathons were done, and done. But the reason I tell you that story, guys, is like I wouldn't even be on the show. I wouldn't be coaching the thousands of people I've coached over the years if it really wasn't for this guy literally put me back together like Humpty Dumpty that fell off a wall. So that's the intro, and we've been friends for many years. Talked to a gal today, by the way. She may be on the show today from DC. I was talking to her in DC, and she's like, Dr. Ross, I saw him when I had my injury. I'm like, well, he's good. Yeah, she's probably here. She's in DC. So, this guy's pretty much the foot whisperer, guys. Like if you, and at one time, I can't remember, it was a KTRH here in Houston. You were on a sports talk show where they actually talked about running injuries, right? Yeah. And it was like Ask the Doc show. So it took a pandemic to shake this guy loose, but I got him here. So let's get on to the show, because what I really want to talk about. First off, Doc, tell everybody what you do. What does a podiatrist do, for those who don't know it? You're also an MD. You're also faculty at one of the most world-renowned medical colleges. Ironically, I started my HR career, 10-year HR career, as a employee benefits specialist for Baylor College of Medicine. I'm familiar with the work they do there. They've been in the news with the virus because they're doing a bunch of research. So just tell us about your practice, who you see. I know you specialize with runners and diabetics, and just give me I know what you do, but give everybody the rundown on what you do, like on a daily basis with surgeries and everything else.
Well, back then when you first met, I was probably doing 2 to 3 marathons a year and knocked off about 25 in 40 years. So
a few Bostons in there too, right?
Oh, 2 Bostons, 5 New Yorks, London, Jerusalem, Austin, you name it, about 13 Houston. So I had had a lot of fun over those years, running those races and doing triathlons. And
Hey,
it was just,
while you're on that subject,
mm,
I've got a treat for you that I want to pull up because you'll love this, because I had to search the interwebs to find pictures of you, which is almost impossible to find a
oh
picture of you
boy.
anymore. Yes. So here's a goodie. Everyone will love this one because I want you to tell me who's in this picture, and I believe you could probably tell me the year. Let me go back to screen share. I'm going to pull this up.
Oh boy, here we go. Down memory lane.
Oh, you're going to love this one. Can you see it? All right. So here's a picture of the doc.
Oh yeah.
Office attire, and this, I believe you told me, was the Little Rock Marathon. I don't know what year that
Right.
was, but I recognize one guy in that picture. You can tell me who the
I think it
rest
was
are.
around 2003. Well, yeah, that's Governor Mike Huckabee, who actually I had run the Marine Corps Marathon with him about 2-3 months earlier, and he said, yeah, because that was the
So he was a
spring.
marathoner in this heyday, huh?
Yeah, he ran Little Rock. He was written up in Runner's World magazine, and I was going up to run the Marine Corps Marathon, and I was writing an article for Inside Texas Running magazine and for Runner's World. So when I met the folks from Runner's World, they said, well, you're going to be on the same boat that night with Governor Huckabee, so you'll get to meet him. So ironically, I just went over, shook his hand, and we just started talking. And he goes, I said, it would be an honor to run with you tomorrow morning. He goes, wait a minute. You've run like 25 marathons, and you're a foot doctor, and you're a sports medicine specialist. How about if I run with you? So bottom line was, that's how we got to know each other in Marine Corps in Washington. And then he was nice enough, gracious enough to invite me and my wife to come to Little Rock and to run the Little Rock Marathon with him that day. And it was fabulous. It's a tough race. It goes way uphill behind that State House. So it's definitely a challenging race.
They're known for their medal too. I don't know. They have a themed out medal every year now. It's amazing.
They call it the Bodacious medal, because it's like one of the biggest medals of all the marathons in the country. It's really something.
Isn't this one of these guys is a Colorado? Is there 2 or 3 governors in this picture?
No.
I thought one of these guys was a Colorado.
Those are his buds. One of the guys, I think, was part of the American Medical Running Association, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's probably, he's got GIJ Army back here. Yeah. So, anyways, I found that. I wanted to throw that up for you. Thought that was pretty cool.
And that's my Baylor photo on the left side.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm now presently full time. In fact, I just left the hospital a few minutes ago, getting ready for my surgical patients tomorrow morning. So, getting back to your first question of how have I evolved in my practice life, my personal life, as well as my professional life? Well, my dream as a kid, since I was involved with so many different sports, from ski racing, swimming, tennis, and I wasn't really a real big time runner. But the bottom line story was I was in Boston doing a 2-month clerkship with the guru of running in the Boston area. His name was Dr. Rob Roy McGregor. And if anybody who's of our age remembers that name, he treated the likes of Bill Rogers, Patty Catalano, Joan Benoit.
Wow.
He was the guy in the Boston area that people flocked to when it came to running. So I had the honor of spending 2 months with him and learning about gait, learning about injuries, learning about runners, learning about orthotics. So when I left after those 2 months, he graciously gave me a box. And that box was full of a pair of Etonic Street Fighters.
Etonic. Wow.
And here's the deal. This guy he's the one that came up with the runner's heel seat for that shoe design. So he was really an inventor. He was avant-garde. He was a runner himself. And he said to me before I left for Houston, I remember this well, he said, you know, you're going to become the running foot doctor in Houston one day, because I was coming down here to do my surgical residency. He says, but I don't think you're going to be coming back to New England, because you're going to fall in love with that town, because it's a year-round running community, and they're going to fall in love with you with your surgical background that you're going to entertain for the next 2 years, plus your sports medicine background and your love for runners. He says, but the reason I'm giving you these shoes, Jeff, is so that you can really discover running. He goes, I don't care if you run a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever. I just want you to understand what runners go through, and I want you to feel what it feels like to be a runner. Well, long story short, fast forward, came my first 5K race, then came my first 10K within 6 months. Then that year, well, this was around 1981, 82, I ran the Houston Marathon, but I ran half. I didn't run the whole thing because I just wanted to feel what it would be like.
But that was that back when it was Tenneco? It was it was only the marathon, right?
That's correct.
So you peeled off at mile 13. So you did the first.
But if you remember, it went by the old, convention center.
Yeah.
And that was the first loop. So then you ran another loop out Allen Parkway to Memorial. So I could just quit at the finish area, and that was my half marathon. And I thought, gee whiz, I could run this whole thing. I mean, I really took my time. So the next year I ran, and the guy I ran with, or who was helping me, said, you need to start real easy. So I said, okay, I'll go out real easy. And by the time I was probably past the half marathon, I thought, man, I could really kick this one. But I ran, I think, like a 4:17. But the very next year, I ran a 3:52.
Wow. And
then I took it down, I think, the very next year, and I ran my first Boston in like a 3:45, 3:49. Then I ran New York in like a 3:45. And then I think my best one was around a 3:42. I had a 3:30, 3:28 going into the 18th mile in Boston, but it was cold, rainy, windy, and Heartbreak Hill just ate my lunch.
Yeah.
So that was, but still, I finished up with a great time. I ran the 100th Boston, which was a real treat.
That's cool.
It was, it was phenomenal. And having run 5 New Yorks, they're a blast. New York's really fun.
That's still my favorite, man. Of course, I haven't run Boston like you have, but there's nothing like New York. You just can't see the city like that, right?
The crowds are great, and when you run through Central Park and you're getting towards that finish, but people don't realize you come around the Park Hotel, the Plaza Hotel, you're coming down Fifth Avenue, coming out of the park, and you're heading up Central Park South. That thing goes straight up. It's got a grade, and people don't realize it. And you still got about 1.5 miles to run at that point. Then when you get to Columbus Circle and you start heading into the park, it's also straight up.
You think you're out of the woods, and you're far from it at that point.
No. And I cramped up.
10K worth of hills.
I cramped up on that final approach to what was Tavern on the Green back then. And I will never forget, what it feels like to cramp up and finish that race hurting like crazy. But I've cramped enough marathons to know what it feels like.
I remember a lot of like 20 deep of people, and I just had that tunnel vision thing where I'm like, just get me to the finish line. And then it kept looping, and it was like the old Austin Motorola marathon where you could see the finish and you thought you were close, but you had to do that little loop back. And you're like, you're swearing to yourself at the end. It's like, get me off the course.
And I cramped up in Austin one year too. I remember that real well. Very hilly race. People don't realize it's downhill to the Capitol, but then it's uphill and downhill all the way for the rest of it. Yep.
I want to transition into like the big subject for tonight, because we could probably split. You and I could talk forever, but
sure.
And it's Gait, because like when I first talked to you. I wanted to start with something that I think is really meaty. So like lately in my spiel as a coach, because this stuff changes every year. You read new research and you tweak things and you add new things to the mix. But like what I've been walking and talking, and you'll get this because you were running when running wasn't cool, man. Back in the 70s, right? But is how you move in space and what you do with pace, pace and space, pace and space. I would say that 80% of what I talk about is pace, which technically gets into heart rate and other things too, right? But literally, how does a human being, that's really why I named my company In Flight Running, like the beauty of a runner in flight, like, or you feel like you're in flight, like you just had that breakthrough run where you're like, just like that Michael Jordan moment where you're in the zone, man, where you're just killing it, right? But gait, so like, so I'd like to just get your definition of gait. Like mine is like really pretty much how a runner or any human being moves when they're in motion, when they're moving through space. So I'd like to get your take on that and what it is and why it's important, especially with runners, which is probably the most primitive form of exercise known to mankind and the most repetitive exercise you can probably do, right?
Well, you hit on one of my favorite subjects. Gait is what it's all about. Back in Boston with Rob Roy McGregor, all we did was watch runners walk up and down his corridor. And by the time I was done with 2 months, I could really analyze a runner's gait and tell you everything about them and why they're probably going to get injured. I have to give kudos to another mentor of mine, Dr. Justin Warwick, who was one of my professors at my school back in New York in those days. And he was really the maven of gait. He worked with one of the biomechanics labs that I used for years for my orthotics. And he really taught me a lot about biomechanics beside the gait. So you have to have a firm understanding of how the body works, how it functions, about muscles, about joints, about structure, and how that interacts or how that really works with your gait. So getting into gait, we look at the way people land on the ground, the way they push off the ground, the imbalances that they may have, the asymmetries they may have, or excessive periods of time when their heel's on the ground or their forefoot's pressing off the ground in propulsion. Maybe one foot's pronating more than the other. Maybe they're supinating more than the other. So these interactions, these kinetic actions of gait really has a lot of bearing upon if a runner or walker or any athlete for that matter is going to be efficient, inefficient, or subject to injury, overuse injury. So you have to analyze gait. You have to watch these folks ahead of time, or if they come into our practice with an injury, it's very, very simple. We can either put them on a computerized mat and look at pressure analysis, or we can do videotape gait analysis, or I can just watch them walk. I remember when I was working with the football team for Baylor, and the strength coach said to me while we were analyzing the football players, he goes, "Doc, why do you need to use a computer? You can just watch people and you can analyze them so easily. I've watched you and you can really figure out what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong." So when we look at gait, when we look at balance, when we look at asymmetries, these are the components to either efficient running or inefficient running and overuse, causing overuse type of injuries. So I think that's the real mainstay for your listeners that we're trying to get across. And that is, you may think you're a efficient runner. You may think you have the best shoes in the world. You may think that, you ran the best marathon or half marathon or 10K. But the bottom line is you may be an injury waiting to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and the words I think about, and I kind of covered this a little bit. I got a little bit into it with Dr. Hasenbank in my show this afternoon, but I think about the things that affect gait. Lack of strength, lack of flexibility. Dr. Hasenbank is a mobility expert. How mobile are you? Range of motion at the joint level. Balance. Strength differences between quad and hamstring, right quad, left quad, right hamstring, left hamstring. And obviously a lot of us have these old war injuries that just kind of reared their ugly head that we had back in high school or whatever too. So,
well, it's funny that you bring that up because I was just thinking of, we must have been reading each other's minds, because you could have played football in high school, or baseball. You could have like torn your ACL or had an MCL injury or meniscus injury. That's going to create a much more restricted knee in terms of range of motion. That's going to create an asymmetry. You may have a limb length difference or a functional limb length difference. You may have a pelvic tilt. You may have internal femoral rotation of your hips. You may have a lot of bowing of your legs, or you may be knock-kneed. These all really contribute to the way in which you walk or how you may become injured. For instance, you may have what's called genu valgum or knock knees. That creates a high Q angle with the knees coming together. Usually that's associated with excessive pronation or a flat foot. Somebody's got flat feet. I can tell you right now, they may be able to run long distance, but most likely they're going to have knee pain, knee problems, chondromalacia, patellofemoral joint syndrome, shin splints, arch pain, and even for that matter, low back pain. Dr. Hassenbeck will tell you, like most chiropractors will tell you, a lot of the low back pain comes from the foundation, which is your feet.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about too is even more upstream. Like I've had both men and women in our group. It seems to be more common with women, and my grandmother suffered from this, and like scoliosis, where you've got curvature of the spine, which can throw the pelvis out of tilt, and then obviously that things don't work going downstream, right?
That creates a real, not functional, but that's actually creating a structural limb length difference.
Yep.
So if you have one leg that may be functioning a quarter, 3/8 of an inch different than the contralateral side, you are definitely going to be looking at an overuse injury. Most likely one foot's going to pronate and the other one's going to supinate, which can create IT band problems, lateral knee pain problems, anterior shin splints, while the other foot or the other leg is going to create more of a piriformis, iliopsoas, gracilis, posterior shin splint, plantar fasciitis, posterior tibial tendonitis, all the problems on the inside versus the outside. So we can analyze this, watch people, and then through a series of working with yourself, coaches, trainers, physical therapists, this is a multidisciplinary approach to how we treat our runners today. This is really important, which you asked me earlier, what are you doing these days? Well, beside my sports medicine gig, 4 years ago, I joined the faculty at Baylor as a full-time faculty, and I'm doing now a program with a great group of vascular surgeons called STEP, Save the Extremity Program, which basically preserves limbs from amputation. So it's definitely a different mindset, but at the same time, your sports medicine background and your gait background contributes a great deal after, unfortunately, we may do a removal of a big toe or part of a foot, and how these folks are going to function after they have to have these amputations, how they're going to be able to walk, how they're going to be able to function, propulse. So fortunately, the two do go hand in hand in some ways.
Yeah, and on that note, I want you to just talk briefly about now, as far as gait, because I know you do, because I've been in your office and you do the gait. You used to have the mat. You used to, do you still use the mat?
Yep.
Yeah, where you walk across the mat and you see where you're planting your feet. And then, of course, I do like dynamic gait, where we talked about this the other day. I use some software where I can videotape people from 3 different angles. I go side view, front and back, and do a full assessment. I can draw angles in there and kind of show them this stuff on film, which is great because, like, who watches themselves run? Like, nobody, right?
Right.
So when they see themselves on film,
unless you're looking in a mirror.
It's like when you do public speaking and you think you do a good job, and then someone tapes you, and you look back at the film and go, "Well, I could have done probably a little bit better." But but get into that. There's ways to improve gait, and obviously with training and strength training's big. That's what a lot what I do, with clients in the gym. But getting in more specific on the medical side with these corrections, I'd love to hear, like, we used to have you come in fleet feet, which we need to get back to that, where you would do these assessments. You do them for free with people, and
Right.
I would be your secretary, and I'd be writing notes, and pronation on the right foot, and then based on that, we would write a shoe script out, prescription, and we'd give it to the shoe
Right.
guys, and then
Yep.
they knew exactly where to start on the wall. Now, of course, now they got this really cool technology where you can, if you've been down to Flea Feet recently, I can't remember the
Yeah,
name.
sure.
I can't remember what it's called, something fit, where you literally take your shoes off and you put your feet in this bed, and it's
Yep.
an iPad, and they basically take a shot of the entire shape of your foot. They can tell the size, right, left, the shape,
Length, width, volume.
the toe box, the heel
Great
cup.
machine.
Yeah, really cool.
Yep.
But on that, so I thought it was always interesting when you did those. There wasn't a lot of people that needed a custom orthotic, but there are those people out there that do. And then there's other off the shelf, like, kind of go into that, like an orthotic, what it is. And you talked about limb length, which I've had a few runners where you determined after seeing them, because I couldn't quite figure it out, that they did have a limb length different. A lot of us don't even know it, but if it's more than a certain amount, I know that can really wreak havoc with your gait.
Well, most people don't realize that typically you may have about a 1/4 inch difference between one limb and the other limb, which is no big deal. You can accommodate for that. It's when you start getting up to 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch difference, then it really adds up. Then it really makes a big difference. But remember, a lot of people don't necessarily have a structural limb length difference. They have a functional limb length difference. What that translates into is you may have a tight gluteal muscle, or a tight hamstring, or tight gastrocsoleus, calf muscles. One side may be tighter than the other. So that's going to create an asymmetry where now you're going to function as if you have a limb length discrepancy. But in actuality, you really don't. When you put somebody on a flat table and you measure and you check the ruler and you say, no, there really isn't. But when you watch them walk, or when you put them on the computer, like you were saying a minute ago, Mike, you can see on the mat where one heel strikes and where the other heel strikes. And the bottom line is, if you see that one heel is striking sooner than the other, that's a functional limb length difference. So then we're able to analyze it and determine, and that helps you because I can send this printed pressure analysis to the lab when I make or prescribe orthotics, or I can send the same data to you with the patient, with the runner, and say, here, show this to Mike Merlino, because he's going to be able to analyze this with a phone call. We'll be able to confer about this and determine what your trajectory of your gait is like, what your maximum pressure, your focal pressure is, if your foot is slanting on one foot more than the other, if you have a functional limb length difference, if you're propulsing sooner than the other, if your forefoot is extended in gait. We can analyze all these things, and then you can start to look at the runner with your video, look at this computer mat, and with my analysis, and say, this is what we need to do. This is how we can correct your running. Or maybe put a heel lift in one shoe, or the patient may need an anti-pronation or anti-supination shoe, a stability shoe, maybe a motion control shoe. As you said a minute ago, most people can get away with just a temporary insole, one of those off-the-shelf insoles. But when there's really a structural problem, when there's a real functional issue going on, these folks may really need a pair of eyeglasses for their feet, i.e. an orthotic.
Yeah, something custom. Like, I know it's kind of interesting. When I first saw you, I had that major soleus. Well, of course, I had the injury. Then I had a soleus issue, and then I think it was the soleus issue, the calf issue, because I had a coach at the time that was hammering the hell out of me on the track. Now I look back at it, I'm like, wow, he was doing crazy stuff with me.
Yeah.
I think I was his guinea pig. But so, and then what came out of that, of course, I've had flat feet my whole life. But interesting enough, I got fitted for those orthotics, and they really helped me get over the hump. And it was really weird. Like, and you can probably speak to this because you and I have had this talk about how you can actually. I remember actually now when I had that break and you put my X-ray up, you said, I can tell you're a runner. I'm like, how can you tell I'm a runner? And you're like, and you had a X-ray that you had a previous patient that was on the wall that was a gentleman that was a senior, and you're like, here's a guy that does nothing. Here's your foot, and then you explained to me that because you've become a very high weight bearing, very high volume weight bearing creature, that your body will actually lay down bone tissue. And then it's really weird. Over the years, I really morphed from an overpronator. That corrected me with those orthotics. But over time, I've become somewhat of a neutral runner, which is kind of strange.
Well, that's usually the typical kind of shoe we like to recommend for our patients if they're going to get a custom orthotic. It's usually a neutral shoe. But what you were alluding to a minute ago, what I was trying to get at was, if you look at the metatarsals and you look at the cortex, which is the outside shelf of the long bones, you could see where the increased diameter of that cortex was. And that's how I knew that you were a runner, because you were building so much bone on those second, third metatarsal bones.
And those are the ones that are doing most of the push off.
That's right.
Right. So that'd be big toe and one over.
Yeah, off the big toe.
Because you land and plant and push.
Second.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, walking and running, are good for people for bone density. I mean, if you create that stress, the bone will react to that stress. Now, of course, somebody with osteoporosis, we're not going to recommend doing high impact. But if they do exercises or if they do resistance, it helps to build bone density.
So if you need an orthotic, and I remember this now, of course, as you know, when you started running, there was maybe 10 shoes you could buy. Now you got 200 on a wall, right? So there's a lot more choices, but the majority of the shoes that are out in the market are neutral. Back to your point, you're saying that since the orthotic does the correction, you want a base shoe that's neutral, because then the orthotic does its work and counters that, whether you're overpronating or oversupinating. So anybody that's got orthotics, they would pop the manufacturer insert out of the shoe and they would replace it with a custom orthotic, correct? But you would start with a platform of a neutral shoe, right?
Right, because remember, the orthotic takes even a inexpensive shoe and makes it into a really good shoe.
Yeah. And
so you don't want to be using an orthotic with a stability shoe, because now you're going to really
now you're way overcorrected, right?
Yeah. That's right. Then you'll really get yourself injured again.
So kind of almost wrapping it up, and I'm going to bring you on, we're going to bring you on every few weeks, man, because I've got a lot of burning questions for you, things that have been happening with running and shoes that are pretty interesting to me. But what would you say are the number one? Now, you did mention a lot, but if you were to pick your top 3 to 5 injuries that you could almost solely nail it and say these are totally related to gait. And then going back to gait, I've never done a gait analysis where I haven't found something with a runner, even a really good runner, there's something they can tweak. And I always say the brain is the command center. The brain tells the body what to do, but you have to be aware of what to do. And so I'm in the middle, like
cognitive.
Yeah, and I don't, like I've found that there's a lot of remember Michael Johnson, the guy that I don't know, 6 gold medals, 5 gold medals, I can't remember. You may know, but
could run.
They told him his whole life that he was too far back on his hips and he would never make it as a sprinter. Well, look who's laughing later after 5 or 6 gold medals, right? So there's this whole thing that you can tweak gait, but sometimes you don't want to really mess with too much of that too, because that's kind of the way people are built, right?
Well, that's like any athlete. I was taught that by one of my trainers who said to me, certain athletes, really class athletes, they're like Maseratis. You know, they're
Yeah.
not Chevrolets. And so you don't want to over tweak them because
Right.
they've been running or playing football or basketball or baseball their whole lives in a certain way. So if you got to tweak them, you got to be really careful not to overcorrect. But
Yeah.
getting back to your question, probably my David Letterman top five would
I
be.
miss David Letterman.
Yeah, I miss him a lot. I really loved him. Plantar fasciitis, probably one of the most common, or chronic
Okay.
heel pain. I've had that many times myself. Achilles tendinosis or Achilles tendinopathy, that'd probably be number two. Uh, some people, particularly forefoot runners or people who have a high arch cavus foot, sesamoiditis, the little bones under the big toe joint, they
Mm.
can become injured or even fractured. I had that when I first started running myself because I had high arch feet. Uh, Probably the other thing would be posterior tibial tendonitis from excessive pronation. People come in and they think it's ankle injury. No, no, it's really the tendon on the inside of your ankle, which is getting strained and overuse.
Mm.
Another overuse problem is due to tight fitting shoes, forefoot loading, extensive propulsive gait, and a tilt to the front of the foot. And you can develop what's called a neuroma or
Mm.
Morton's neuroma. Very common in runners. I've had it myself for years. It's an entrapment of the nerve between the metatarsal bones. So it's as if the metatarsal bones are rubbing this nerve every time your foot's going like this. So again, a supportive shoe, a temporary insole, or a prescription orthotic, maybe with a little peanut to keep the bones separated so they don't rub that nerve to death. And then again, getting back to shoes and orthotics, that could curtail all these problems very simply. The other one, typical. A runner comes in, they're training for the marathon, and they say, boy, my knees are killing me.
Hmm.
And I go, well, did you see your knee orthopedist? No, or I did. And all I was told was I need to strengthen my quads and I need to do some physical therapy. And then you watch them walk and you see that they're excessive pronators. The knees are
Mm.
going back and forth. So many times you might have a internal derangement. You may really have a patellofemoral joint syndrome issue, but a lot of times chronic knee pain or runner's knee is due to a gait problem or
Yeah.
excessive pronation or genu valgum of the knee. So the funny thing is, a lot of these runners will come in, we'll fix them up with an orthotic, which helps make the pain go away. The knees are fine. They go a year later, they're coming back, and they're training for the marathon again, right? And they go, guess what? My knee pain's back. So guess what? You look at the shoes are worn out. Or you look at the orthotics are tilted and they're going back and forth. And I go, well, your orthotics just need to be refurbished. Send them back to the lab, knee pain's gone again.
That happened. I
So,
think that happened once with when I got a second pair from you,
uh-huh.
because you get busy and then you're like,
They
and
wear
then
it out.
you're like, yeah, dude, you need a new pair of orthotics.
Right.
It's like almost like having a wobbly tire, in your car, right?
That's a great analogy. I use that analogy quite often. If you think about it, we look at our front end of our car or we look at tire balancing to prevent excessive wear of the tires. Well, guess what? If you align the lower extremity, you put those knees frontal where they belong, and you keep that foot balanced and prevent it from going back and forth, now you're running in much better alignment. And you're going to be more efficient, and you're not going to wear out your knee or your hip or cause stress to your lower back.
Yeah. All right, we're about to wrap it up. If you guys have any questions, if anyone's here in the feed, I got a few people here. Guys, just put a question mark in your name, where you're from. You've got a question for the doc, and why? We'll see if we get any takers here. What did I want to ask you about? There was one thing I want to ask you here because we have some time to kind of cover it. I'm just curious, man. I don't want to overdo it because my gosh, we've been living this pandemic but it's on people's minds. And I'd like to know, you and I had a discussion the other day about telemedicine. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I would love for you to just share some of the things you've been doing with assessments from your office over video, and how has this pandemic affected you on the surgical side of things with what you do with your practice?
Well, when the pandemic really was at full blast and we were really kind of, sheltering, uh, we had to really limit the number of patients in our clinics to basically just emergency type visits.
Mm.
Now, what came out of that, though, was utilizing telemedicine to talk to a lot of our patients that didn't necessarily need to come into the office. It was
Oh, wow.
fabulous. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
just incredible. People would just sit there, and it's as if they were sitting in my office talking to me like you and I are talking right now. And I'd say, put the computer on your desk and step back for me and just walk back and forth. I could actually watch people walk in their own homes
That's
with
cool.
their own home computer.
And
Fabulous.
it took a pandemic to even do that, right? Crazy.
Well, I never would have thought about doing that, but
Yeah.
I always liked the concept of telemedicine because I always thought you're saving the patient a visit into the office. I mean, time is money. They got things to do. They're running
Parking.
around. If you can really be more efficient, if they could be in their office, let's say at work, you've saved them from getting in the car, driving into the med center, parking, cost, and they could be more efficient. And then here's the deal. You could basically screen these people, give them an idea. Okay, that's plantar fasciitis. Oh, that's a shin splint from this. I mean, when I used to do the radio shows, basically people call up and it was like quiz the doc. It was the same cookbook kind of thing. You really
Yeah.
can analyze just by people's story and history what's going on. But the beauty of telemedicine is that it's a great screen. People can do what I tell them to do initially as if they were in the office, such as you need to stretch more, you need to wear a night splint, you should get a temporary insole, get out a frozen water bottle and start massaging or icing. You need to work on your range of motion. You need to work on proprioception. This is something that
Mm.
you and I see all the time, especially after an injury. By the way, I didn't mention earlier when you were asking about the MAT scan, in addition to watching people walk over the scan and gait, we have actually a computer program that can analyze balance and if somebody really after an injury is stable on the mat. So we can actually determine when a young kid or an adult is ready to return to play or not, based
Cool.
upon have they established proprioception. That's really a cool part of the program of that computer.
Hmm.
So telemedicine can do a lot. I think it's been there all along. I think it's just gotten the green light now under the circumstances. It's here to stay. It's much more efficient. I mean, heck, I can talk to patients from all over the country, all over the world now.
Yeah, it's cool.
Who
I mean,
call, who call,
I'm coaching people around the country on Zoom now. It's amazing. I've got
yeah,
a few people around the country, and we do a 15-minute Zoom call once a week, and we talk about their training and tweak it, and it's great, man. Hey,
well,
I've got a
I've got
question
patients.
here. I got a question here from Suheil. Suheil's one of
Okay.
my runners in my group, and he's had some issues with plantar fasciitis. This question is an exercise or tips for plantar, and sometimes you have to get over the plantar before you get into too much exercise part of it. But what could you lend? What type of knowledge could you lend to him on that?
Well, the hamstring and the gastrocnemius, so the calf muscle stretches, are important. A lot of times, a lot of runners don't stretch. Now, there's always been this controversy about, do I stretch before I run? Do I stretch during my run? Or do I stretch after the run? I've always been a firm believer in warm-up, light stretching
Yep.
before you run. Obviously, during the
Or
run,
walk, or
maybe
actually walk before you run is what I preach every day.
that's
Like the best way
yeah,
for a runner to warm up is, guess what? Walk.
that's right. warm up the muscles, and get your heels to the ground and work that Achilles tendon and work that calf muscle group. Because if you just think that you're going to go from the office to Memorial Park and go run 5-6 miles, forget it.
Yeah.
And how a woman who wears high heel shoes, 3-inch heels, you know what that does to the heel? It raises the heel, it shortens the calf muscle by that much. So a lot of times they'll go into aerobic class and they're not stretching ahead of time. So they'll develop all kinds of calf muscle strains, and again, back to your runner who's asking about the plantar fasciitis, 9 times out of 10, that plantar fasciitis is either due to pronation, excessive pronation, or due to a tight gastrocsoleus hamstring muscle group.
So gastrocsoleus, you're talking all those muscles around the calf.
Correct.
Right.
And Achilles. So there's two sets of stretches for the Achilles, an eccentric contraction stretch, and for the gastrocsoleus.
One of these times we'll actually do a show on that. We can literally show them right on the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
well,
question.
Anyway, that's the stretching portion. And of course, you want to reduce the inflammation because plantar fasciitis creates inflammation, which is edema. And edema around the plantar fascia can create entrapment of the nerve. It can cause the fascia to thicken, interrupt blood supply, and create a chronic situation. So you don't want to let that plantar fasciitis exist for, like some people, for a year or months or longer.
While we're on that, and then we'll start wrapping it up. What other icing and things like that? I know sometimes a frozen water bottle, or what's the best home remedy stuff you could give somebody for plantar fasciitis?
I am a huge believer because I use it myself. When I've had plantar fasciitis, even again recently, I get my night splint out. I wear that night splint when I sleep because here's the deal. When you're sleeping, you don't realize it, but you kind of crawl up.
Yeah.
Some people crawl up in fetal positions. Some people are like this. That tightens all the muscle groups during the course of that evening. You wake up in the morning, everything is tight as a drum, and that's why when you take your first steps out of bed, your heel hurts because everything's tight. You wear this night splint, your foot is now, let's see if I can do it on the camera.
Does it keep it in a flex position? Yeah.
Yeah, keeps it dorsiflexed like this.
Okay, yeah.
So keeps it pulled back. That stretches out both the fascia, the Achilles tendon, and the gastrocsoleus. That's why people tell me all the time.
If you have that first step out of bed, you'll know, because if you've got plantar and stuff, that first step out of bed can be like youchy, like
excruciating.
Yeah.
Until you walk around or until you take a shower and things are warmed up.
Mm-hmm.
So the icing, the stretching. I also recommend, rather than taking something internally, I really believe in a topical anti-inflammatory, non-steroidal, like a gel, whether it's compounded.
Biofreeze or something like that off the shelf, or something you would prescribe?
That just makes you feel good. Biofreeze is just something that makes it feel good. I'm talking about a non-steroidal. It's like Advil or Aleve in a topical form.
Huh. Okay.
And that's real. And then massage it. The best thing you can do if you got plantar fasciitis, go to your best massage therapist.
I got one
that really. Yeah, I know. Me too. One who really
Everyone
knows
should have one, right?
Yeah. And then get in there with your thumb. Get in there with your thumb and break up that scar tissue and mobilize that plantar fascia. Break down that scar tissue. It'll hurt like heck in the beginning, but it's going to feel so much better later on.
Guys, I'm going to put Dr. Ross's email up here, and we'll put that on the tail end because we're about to wrap it up. But you can reach him at jeffross@bcm.edu. Okay. And I've got his phone number here, 713-798-5700. If you call that number, ask for Dr. Ross's office, because that's a main switchboard number, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that should wrap it up for tonight, man. I know there's many other topics we can hit. So I'll just bring in probably once a month and, kind of kind of chit chat about, I mean, it's amazing how, I've learned this from you and just dealing with runners, how important your feet are and how multifaceted I'll say lower leg, because I know you deal with ankles and a lot of it goes upstream to knee, but anything say below the knee, how complicated all these moving parts are, especially for a runner, right?
Well, you and I talked about the other night, remember, both feet aren't on the ground at the same time all the time. So in many cases, when you're in single limb support, that's when things can happen. When that other leg is off the ground and swinging, and you're just basically balancing on one foot. That's where you have to have that core. That's why ballet dancers, athletes who work on their core have strong running gait.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they're on that one foot, they need to have that strong core.
Because it's really, I always tell, it's really, running's a series of hops.
Yeah.
It's kind of a series of baby hop, just plant, push, plant, push, plant, push, right?
Yep, your heel striking.
I don't know if you noticed it on the show, Dr. Ross, but Dale Lockett was on the show here for a little bit. I put a comment on there, but Dale.
That's my buddy.
Yeah, it works for Channel 11, right?
Yep.
So I don't know if you saw his comment, but Dale said both you guys got me through my first marathon.
Yep.
He was with In-Flight, and then I know he had an injury issue, and I think I referred him to you. So that was kind of cool seeing Dale.
He's one of my favorites.
Good guy, man. Good guy.
Near and dear. Nice to hear his name.
I want to thank Dr. Ross for joining us tonight. That's it for tonight's show. We'll have, as I mentioned, we'll have Dr. Ross back on the show. I'm sure multiple times. We've been talking about doing this for a while, and what I love about the internet is I can do whatever the heck I want, man. We can have our own show, and no one's censoring us and telling us when we have fast breaks and when we got to go to commercial. So, guys, I'm going to put up our social media here. I'm just going to share this real quick with you. So, I'll go ahead. Hold on. Let me pull it up here real quick. I'll go. Got it here. Lost my screen. If you guys can see that. Can you see that, Dr. Ross?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hold up. I got you up there. That's good.
Yep.
I got to change the slide. Here it is. Let me pull it up. I've got I'm getting used to all these controls on here. It's crazy how many things I can do with this thing. All right, could you guys see that?
You're a whiz kid. You know that?
Man, I got my new Apple. I got my new MacBook now. So get ready, man.
When was that picture taken, Mike?
Not too long ago. Even though I think that it looks like I got less gray hair in that one, but that was only a few months ago, man.
You look like a young stud there. Look at you.
So yeah, you guys can follow us on Facebook at In-Flight Running. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, guys. It's youtube.com/inflightrunning. That's the best way to follow us. What's really cool about YouTube, you guys can listen to us in the car, and eventually we'll be on iHeartRadio. We'll be on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, all these different networks. So we're working on that. So the audio from the show will eventually be a podcast, where you can listen to it on audio at your leisure, okay? You guys got questions about anything we talked about tonight, just drop us an email, call us. We'd love to. We're here to help you guys. This show is all about that, okay? So we'll let you go for tonight. And remember, when all else fails, especially right now, just go for a run, okay? Good night, and thanks again, Dr. Ross. I appreciate it. Have fun. All right, you guys take care. See you.
Good.
All right, bye.
Thanks for joining.